Hello again. My lesson today in the New Testament is Fake series is titled Temple of Adam. I've been looking for a while now at the sacrificial system in the Torah as a part of my lessons about the New Testament. And it came to my mind that the sacrificial system is flawed in the Torah. People will try to use all kinds of technicalities in the Torah and will go by every word that is written and try to tell you that the words actually say this or the Hebrew words actually mean this. Yet I find a deception in how the teachers of the Torah and the teachers of the New Testament book teach about God. Because you can say, but it actually says this in the text, in the Greek or in the Hebrew. And you say certain things like that sometimes only when you are arguing critical points. But normally you will go every Sunday or every Sabbath and teach something contrary to that, so that there is a written instruction on the paper of the text, but there is a day-to-day or a week-to-week instruction or teaching that is given worldwide by people who use the New Testament or the Old Testament / Torah. That is different. But as I thought about the Temple of Adam and the animal sacrifices and flesh sacrifices in the Torah and of the New Testament Calvary scene, and the temple system now that I'm looking at lately, I can see that there is a problem with the entire Bible from Genesis all the way to the book of Revelation. And so as I look at the communication between quote-unquote God and man, it's causing me to think some more thoughts, or just these different ideas are coming to mind. It eventually took me to the New Testament, even though I was trying to start out from Genesis chapter 3, and I ended up in the book of John, which I will end this lesson with, where it is said that Jesus, who supposedly is God, dwelt among us. In John chapter 1 verse 14, and that word dwelt really means he tabernacled among us. And when you deal with tabernacle, it doesn't take long for you to come across the word temple. And so I've titled this the Temple of Adam. If I read here from Genesis chapter 3 and verse 8, it says, "And they heard the voice of the Lord God walking in the garden in the cool of the day, and Adam and his wife hid themselves from the presence of the Lord God amongst the trees of the garden." It seems to me that the communication that Adam had, even before this, when in chapter 2, it was saying that the Lord told him to eat from the trees. And there was no temple at that time, so just as in chapter 3, when there was again no temple, given in the Torah setting right here, in the opening chapters of Genesis, that the communication between God and the first man according to the Torah was not done in a temple that people made with hands. In fact, it does not show that Adam builded any physical structures. The only thing that I came up with is that the communication was happening inside of his mind, so that it says that he heard the voice of the Lord God walking or moving. And it kind of paints a picture to me of something going on inside of his mind, so that it said he heard the voice and you usually hear a voice in your head or in your mind. And when you deal with mind, you're talking about that inner part of yourself that you can't see, although sometimes we might say it's happening in your brain. Generally, in your brain, which in some kind of way is interfacing with your mind, that inner functioning, thoughtful part of you, or the heart, again, that unseen part of us, which from the Hebrew word leb, is dealing with the inner recesses of man, that part that allows him the functionality of thought or mindfulness or meditation, dwelling on an idea, churning around different feelings and thoughts in the mind that are unseen, but that the man may then go ahead and express in the mundane world through his physical body, so that what goes on in the leb or the heart of the man can be seen or expressed or given action to by the physical body in the physical world in which the man lives. Inside this thought system, then, would be somehow, while still mysterious, the whole idea of the temple of Adam, as opposed to a temple that man may build, whether it's a temple in India or a temple in ancient Israel. And how a temple might be in India or in Babylon, in Assyria or in Egypt, when the children of Israel, the only family, according to Amos chapter 3 verse 2, that the Most High knows, how both known and unknown nations can come up with the same idea to interface with deity is a puzzle to me. Because I would think that if you are the only nation that the Creator knows, you should have some kind of way to interface with your God that other nations just can't tap into. But they're making the same kind of temples or temple system that Israel has. That's a serious problem for me. So I must investigate the Torah for years to come, as opposed to approaching it the way I've done all along, as a book of faith. It is more now put into the category of a book of investigation, which itself doesn't really take away from the whole idea of the Torah, because one should search. Now, the main idea here in this lesson, based on definitions I'm going to give to you and discussions on other verses I might read, is that the temple is about what comes to you in your mind, or what you see in your mind as the happenings take place in your brain or mind and enters your thoughts, become visible, might I say, or tangible, for want of a better expression, in your thoughts, in your mind. This then means the true temple is inside you, and you never enter the temple, like seen in the pages of the Torah by Israelite priests, or seen elsewhere by priests of other nations and other religions. You never actually enter the temple, because like Adam's temple, whose temple was inside his mind, so that in his mind he heard the voice, and so the voice is coming inside of his mind as something that is going on inside the man. So the Torah Adam then has nowhere to go across town or in the center of the city or of the garden to enter a temple to have conversation with God or to offer a sacrifice with him, to do any such thing, and then to exit the temple again because he's finished dealing with God. God has to move with the man because God already breathed the breath of life into the man, which means he entered inside the man. Now wherever the man goes, God goes. So Adam never has to go to a temple to meet with God or to enter into a temple to deal with God, which is why he heard the voice of God walking or moving, because as Adam moved to hide physically or moved in his mind from the uncomfortable dilemma of having quote unquote fallen, he meets God. Because God is always met by Adam, because God goes wherever Adam goes, because God is in Adam, because he blew breath and entered into the man. So at the time when he made the man and blew breath into him, God entered the man. And there, in an important sense, God lives. So Adam can never get rid of God. But he hears the voice. Because like when you think thoughts, there is a voice going on inside your mind. The voice Adam heard was the voice of God or conscience. The voice of God was the voice of Adam, letting him know in his own mind that he crossed the line, according to how the text seems to present itself. So God then is experienced as speaking inside of you, or in this case inside of Adam. So Adam does not enter a temple to have all of this going on. Now if I look at the etymology for the word temple from teamonline.com, it says here, a building for worship, edifice dedicated to the service of a deity. And that's an interesting thing right there, a building for worship, because at some point we have to consider this whole word worship. I won't do it here, but at some point I'm going to have to look into that, because why would Adam need a place to go to worship? Anyway, it's an edifice dedicated to the service of a deity or deities. Meaning at first with the worship part that, who told man that he needed to worship anything or anyone? But temple, to continue, from the Old English tempel, from Latin templum, and that word templum actually it needs a little bit more talking about from information I've covered up encountered for a while now, that I need more studying on. So whenever I've done that, I'll be able to present it to you. But for now, from Latin templum, piece of ground consecrated for the taking of auspices, building for worship of a god. It also goes on to say of uncertain signification. So temple and worship, but there's something uncertain right there about the significance of all of this. But we are sure that we need to go into a temple to worship God, or in a temple to offer sacrifices unto the God of Israel. This ground is consecrated. But it seems to me that wherever Adam went, God was all on that ground. Because God is never divorced from the man. Notice the Torah says, the day you eat, you're going to die. But as soon as Eve gives birth, she says, I've gotten a man from the Lord. So life continues. Life is being perpetuated. She seems to still know this God and worships him by saying, I have gotten a man from. And God is clearly continuing to deal with man, and man continues to respond to God after Eden. It continues with the etymology of temple, saying it means to cut, or notion of place reserved or cut out, or to root, to stretch. So we're talking about temple now, and we know even the ancient Cushites would cut out temples out of rocks. So to cut out. And by the way, cutting out, and they're doing this before there is a nation of Israel. As if it means to try to tell me that I should think that temples were being made by Cushites who are not Israelites according to regular Torah teaching, because they are of the Hamites, who are not the chosen seed of God. So what's the chosen seed of Shem doing, picking up on temples that were started up by Cushite Hamites? So then Israel, or Shem, is being led by people who are not chosen by God as the only chosen family of earth. See Amos chapter 3 verse 2. You only have I known of all the nations of the earth. But it goes on meaning temple, to stretch. So cut out, to stretch. The notion being perhaps the stretched string that marks off the ground. Compare Greek temenos, sacred area around a temple, literally place cut off. Sometimes it makes me wonder if the temple has to do something just only with the mind of Adam. Because even the garden, if you think of it as some sort of a mind, might be likened unto a temple. And I don't really feel strange, because sometimes people will teach that the garden was Israel itself. So it's probably not too strange for me here to suggest that maybe the garden is a type of the mind of Adam, or the mind of man. That the garden is the temple, which is the mind of man, the inner part of man. And in this garden, he thinks all these thoughts and interfaces with the Creator. And as the voice comes into his mind, oh my goodness, I just messed up. I've done something dangerous or something, terrible here. That in the garden of his mind, he hears the voice moving as he thinks all these new thoughts. But if we move on, it's a place cut off. And remember, the Garden of Eden was a place that seemed to be cut off or marked out from the other. It was its own territory from the other places around, such that it says he placed the garden eastward in Eden. This word temple also means to cut. So it seems here something that is defined. Someone put some thought into this. When you even look at the human body, clearly some thought was put into making it. You look at the skies, the placement of the stars. You look at the trees that grow up. You look at where the water meets land. Something seems well defined about creation. Figurative sense of temple says any place regarded as occupied by divine presence. Well, where would Adam have a sense of the divine presence but in his mind? So that if Adam is already experiencing the divine presence in his mind, such as when he meditates or when he thinks or gives attention to the inner part of him, Adam then would not have needed to be shown in the text to have some deficiency about his life or his quote-unquote perfect, pristine state or condition, because he lacks a temple, a building to go into. Because divine presence is always with him, because he blew breath into the man, and the man became a living soul. So like Genesis 2:7 says, and the Lord God formed man of the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living soul. So breathed into him means he entered into the man. Now if God has entered inside of you, do you need to go to a temple or go anywhere in order to find God or to meet with God? Do you need to search for God? And when we deal with the Torah here, do you need to go up to Calvary to find God? Do you need to go to an Israelite high priest with an animal on a high holy day, or the Day of Atonement, for example, in order to connect with God? Or are you already with God? So if the spirit of man is the candle of the Lord, then wherever you are, your spirit is also. That means the candle of the Lord is with you, in you, all the time. If the candle of the Lord is inside of you at all times, then the light is in you, and the presence of the divine is always there. How is an animal or Calvary flesh sacrifice going to assist you beyond what the divine presence can already do? So the divine presence is assisting you, to live, to be a man or a woman. It makes you be alive. If you are alive, then you live because of the presence that is in you. The divine that is in you causes you to live. So I suggest here that maybe that is what we need to nurture or remain connected with. To not let the light go out, because the spirit of man is the candle off. When that light goes out, obviously, you might be needing some further searching and possibly going in a temple or bringing something to offer, because the light has gone out. So you fall prey to every kind of doctrine that looks spectacular, looks like it is from God. Because the light has gone out, the candle of the Lord is no longer lit, and you cannot see what you are doing, and that someone else is trying to light a fire on an altar for you, because your light has gone out inside of you, and you attempt to fix the problem of no longer experiencing light in you by having someone light a fire outside of you that is on an altar, when the fire or the light should be lit inside of your body. Instead, you try to get a body of an animal external to you be lit with a fire on the outside of you. Calvary is fake, because it is built on this ancient sacrificial system that has nothing to do with the Creator. So we go on looking at the word temple. It says something interesting here, which I never thought about before. It says flattened area on either side of the forehead from the mid-14th century. And you can look up this picture online if you want to. From Old French temple, or side of the forehead. From Vulgar Latin tempula. From Latin tempora, plural of tempus, side of the forehead. Alright, so you're dealing with the head when you're dealing with the temple. Remember, I told you the scripture says Adam heard the voice of the Lord walking in the garden. That's Genesis 3 and verse 8. So he heard it in his mind. That's what I was saying earlier. So the temple is dealing with the side of the forehead. Flattened area on either side of the forehead. So kind of like think of the sides of your head. Generally accepted, and also, so side of the head and also side of the forehead. So it looks like you're dealing with the sides of your head. So you're getting like idea of like a building, which gives you an idea of a temple with its sides. But think of your own head as having those sides. So that the temple would be contained inside of you, but you want to go to a physical building made with hands that people say is a temple, and you try to go inside that physical temple when you are the temple based on the idea of what is contained within the sides of your head or your forehead. Because the temple is in you, because he blew breath into the man and entered inside of the man. And man became a living soul. So if the temple is in you, in your mind, in your head, meaning loosely here like your heart, it's inside of you. But because we think thoughts and we associate that with the brain that's in the head, then the side of the head, the forehead and so on, is like the casing that in a sense makes up the temple. So when he enters inside the man, for the man to become a living soul, he is entering into the temple of man, so that man is a temple which the divine inhabits, or the creator inhabits. The creator lives inside the man. He entered into the man, but you are trying to enter into a temple and waiting for Messiah to return and for third temple to be built again, so that you can go back to an old system where you are physically going inside of a temple, when the real truth here is that you don't go inside a temple to connect with the Creator, but the Creator already connected with you by entering inside of you to cause you to be a living soul. This is how Adam would have experienced it. This is the temple of Adam. Either side of the forehead, generally accepted as having originally meant the thin stretch of skin at the side of the forehead, and being from temp to stretch, an extension of root 10 to stretch. The sense development would be from stretchings to stretched skin. Because if you go look this up online, just run a search for a team online for the word temple, you're going to come across it, and you run some more searches. You'll see like the part inside the head. And I think I should get to that a little bit later on. Inside the head, where the skin is stretched over. So it's like the skin then would be the most outer part of the temple of you, or of the temple of your head, which is going to give the idea that something is contained inside the temple, which is your brain or your mind or the thoughts of your heart, is contained inside of you. Now, temple again from wikidiff.com. So that's wikidiff.com. And I'm looking at the word temple, and it says here definition as nouns, the difference between temple and tabernacle, because I was searching on temple and tabernacle. Difference between temple and tabernacle is that temple is a building for worship. Remember, I wondered earlier who told us that we needed to worship. But anyway, temple is a building for worship, or temple can be the slightly flatter region on either side of the head, back of the eye, and forehead. So you're all dealing with like your head structure, above the zygomatic arch, in front of the ear, or temple, the temple of your head, like when you say your temple hurts or something like that, or you got a headache by your temple, or somebody hit you in your temple, that area. So this zygomatic arch and in front of the ear or temple can be weaving, a contrivance used in a loom for keeping the web stretched transversely, while tabernacle is any temporary dwelling, a hut, tent, booth. So that part that's contained inside your head is more something that should be permanent, because that's like a part of your body contained inside of the head. So I think they're given the idea here that temple has a sort of permanence to it, such that temples would be kept for a long time and maintained. And one of the ways that you can even date events in history and date nations and people groups in history and practices are by temples, ancient temples that are found, excavated. Some might be buried underwater, some just under the earth, and they dig them up. And some are still standing to this day and, have never been completely demolished or destroyed. And usually when a temple is destroyed violently, like let's say by an army, or by natural disaster like a flood, it is seen as some sort of a judgment from the divine, or judgment from God, or whatever God the people are worshipping. Because since the temple has the connotation of permanence and good relations with God, if it is destroyed, then it is being destroyed because the people have erred in their ways, their God is angry with them, and so their temple is destroyed to show that they have lost their way and judgment has come. So temple should have a permanence. So this zygomatic arch in the head area, in the temple area, should always be there, and certainly the different parts of your head should always be there anyway, as a permanent part of the functioning of your head and of your body. So temple deals with permanence and should not just be broken down. That's why when the Hebrews had their temple damaged or destroyed, they felt kind of lost because our temple is gone. And they even allowed the heathen Herod to rebuild their temple. They're so desperate to have a temple back that even the unrighteous, we should take a temple from him. They had seriously lost their way. But tabernacle is like a temporary dwelling place, a hut, a tent, a booth. So like when the children of Israel came out from the Egyptians, who had their permanent temples made of rocks, made of stone that would last a long time, thousands of years, the children of Israel just set up a quick tabernacle from a tent, temporary dwelling, which, as I looked into this lesson, preparing it, I thought how theologically ridiculous it is for Israel to set up a tabernacle in the wilderness. And it brings back to mind the Mosai saying, it's not to me you offer those sacrifices 40 years in the wilderness, but to your god Moloch, or Chemosh. Because if you are fleeing from the Egyptians, and I'm not saying the Exodus did not happen, that's not my problem right here. I'm just on a search for truth. And wherever the truth is, that's just where I want to go. That's where I want to connect to. I'm searching. So it might well be the truth that there was an Exodus, but something is wrong with the details of the story in the Torah. But I'm digging through, trying to excavate to find truth. So the theological problem I have at this point is that temple deals with permanence, tabernacle with that which is temporary. Israel seeks deliverance from the permanence of the structure and system, and temples made of rocks in Egypt, to go in an uncertain place in a wilderness where they have to set up a temporary tabernacle, having left the permanence of rock temples behind in Egypt. And they say this is superior to the permanence of the long-standing, thousands of years old temples in the land of Egypt, which people can still go today. I've never been there. One day I would like to see it for myself, to connect again with the permanence of that which was, as I try to learn some more about all of this. Now, from a team online, let's look up the word tabernacle. It says here, tabernacle, mid-13th century. Portable sanctuary carried by the Israelites in the wilderness. From Old French tabernacle, the Jewish tabernacle, tent, canopy, tomb, monument. So tomb and monument. So this looks like someone who is fleeing, someone who's running, someone who's traveling. They're on the move all the time. No wonder they say the Hebrews were a nomadic type of people. Which again, makes me really wonder, because I just mentioned the permanence of Egypt in its own land, not excusing any hardships that have been put on them when it says that they were dealing harshly with the Hebrews. But still they had these permanent temples that were glorious in their own right. But the Hebrews are running around with a tent, a canopy, as a tabernacle. A tent of an augur for taking observations. A diminutive of taberna for hut, cabin, or booth. I want to say one or two things here on that. Especially tabernaculum from the Latin for tent, for taking observations. Now the very wise children of Israel, who was linked to a patriarch called Noah, who was very wise to build an ark that could withstand all the devastation of a so-called worldwide flood. And I don't know if it was worldwide or not. I haven't looked into that yet, but I intend to. This man was so smart to do that. But they built, coming out of Egypt after a long time of having the history of their very wise patriarch and ancient Noah. And they built a tent, which is sometimes a word used to talk about a place for taking observations. So then, if a tent from the Latin tabernaculum is used for taking observations, then it does not run too far from what I said earlier, that the garden in the mind, or the temple that was in the mind of Adam, which the Creator occupied permanently in his mind, was where then Adam would have been taking observations through meditation of what was happening inside of him as he thought thoughts or received thoughts based on anything that was going on inside his mind, as words came to him in what we would call thoughts. So he took observations. in what seemed to me to be a permanent setup when the Creator made him, Adam, as the temple and entered inside the temple of Adam and made that permanent. But somehow when Israelites come on the scene, they settle for the temporary setup of a hut or a tent to take observations. This portable sanctuary, though, the tabernacle that they used in the wilderness, has them on the move, which moves away from the permanence of the tabernacle. So they're moving around. So there seems to have been some sort of degrading of the temple to the tabernacle, where Adam was more, according to my line of teaching here, associated with the temple, the permanence of the temple, but when he started out, because he became a living soul after his temple was set up and the Creator entered inside his temple to occupy the temple. But Israel, instead of starting out like that with permanence, starts out with that which is portable and more flimsy and can be affected by the wind, strong winds blowing. Israel starts out with a more weaker approach to housing the knowledge or the presence of God, with a simple, flimsy tabernacle. But Adam had the permanence of a temple, which the Creator addressed immediately how to keep it permanent, functioning, well fine-tuned kind of way by eating from these particular trees, but just don't touch that one. So he ensured that the man could maintain the permanence of the temple. So he gave the man all that he needed to ensure permanence in dealing with God and in remaining an original kind of man that the Creator was pleased to dwell in. But the temple, or rather the tabernacle of Israel in the wilderness as a tent, showed Israel setting up and taking down, putting up and demolishing the presence of their God. Because every time they needed to move, they got to take down this tent. So that God, in a deeply theological and philosophical sense, is shown to just be disappearing from them every now and then whenever they needed to take that down. No wonder there has to be some kind of a compensation in the scriptures of a pillar of fire by night and pillar of cloud by day, because they took down his presence. So since the tent isn't set up at certain points, he now has to compensate for a lack of presence that the people can trust in, or rather no longer trust in, because they're not seeing the temple anymore, and no priest can enter into the temple because the temple is no longer visible. So there's no longer a visible manifestation of the presence or temple of God. So he has to try to show that he's with them in some other kind of way. But Adam had the permanence of the presence or relationship of God all the time, with a permanent setup of a temple, because he was the temple in whom the Creator went. You know, like when you want a permanent or a long-lasting, stable relationship with a spouse. That's how the Creator was dealing with Adam, until he got out of line. And I find that this out of line seems to have brought other strange practices among the Church of Israel and the world, in forms of like what I'm dealing here in this series with the, animals being used for sacrifice, child sacrifice, Calvary, temples, and so on. All these things to try to interface with God, when Adam would have just told you, if he was allowed to speak in the Torah that opens up with him as the first man in the book, somehow he was not able to tell you himself that the temple is you. So because you never got to hear from him, you trusted in portable sanctuaries that you would put up and take down until one day you could make your permanent one, like the Egyptians you left behind and all the other nations of the earth that used these permanent looking physical temples. But Adam never got to teach you, because the first man in the book never gets to teach you things. And he is an important man. But the other important men in scripture are able to teach you things. Why does this first important man not get to teach you? Somehow Abraham can teach certain stuff by whatever went on in his life in the scriptures. Through his life you learn that God wants to deal with him or deal with man or deal with the people that would later become Israel. Noah's life will teach you that God has something to do with him and his family and wants to do certain things with man and make covenant with man and so on. Moses certainly, he teaches you through his life and his words that there are certain laws that the Creator wants you to live by and so on. And you should function a certain way. And this is how you can have blessings. And this is how you cannot have curses. And all these people seem to have been given at length some kind of teaching that you can study out, like I said, at length. But Adam doesn't get the chance to teach in the scriptures. That is very odd. So that there's no way you can measure what any of these other guys, Noah, Abraham, any of them, Moses, whoever else, the prophets, you can't measure up what they're saying against the precept of Adam to see if they're going off, because Adam and Eve left behind a quote-unquote fallen world. So how can you tell that prophets come later on or patriarchs come later on are walking the right line? When Adam exited the scene in a wrong way and never got to drop his teachings, the first man to have connected with the Creator, and he doesn't get to give teachings at length, but you take it from everybody else who comes teaching in the scriptures, who are living in a fallen world themselves, some of them even sleeping with their neighbor's wife and killing just to get the woman, like David did. I'm not trying to mess with you. I'm just trying to search too. I'm just trying to search. Now, if you go on some more, the use of the word in English, still here dealing with, I'm looking now here, it says temple, transferred late 14th century to the temple in Jerusalem, which continued its function. So it seems like the tabernacle later on became a temple, which continued the function of the tabernacle, but in a more permanent form. So now they have to climb up and go higher again now. So they're at the bottom with the temple. Now they're with a tabernacle. Now they're climbing up to the level of a temple with its permanence, like in Egypt and other places. The Mayan temples, Babylonian temples, Assyrian temples, everybody's kind of temples. So they're climbing up to the level of temples. So now Israel has grown to the level of other nations that they say are pagan, even though they should be different from the nations. So, okay, the temple in Jerusalem is there. The sense of a house of worship, first recorded in the 1690s, that seems to show up. Also in biblical language, the body as the temporary abode of the soul. So temple is dealing with this. The old, tabernacle, because I'm still dealing with tabernacle, is dealing with the temporary abode of the soul. The Old Testament Jewish Feast of Tabernacles, see again, tabernacles. So you kind of wonder there if the feast should eventually end, because you're dealing with a limited word, tabernacle, whereas temple might more seem permanent, just as the body is a temporary abode of the soul, because it seems one day you're going to die, because it's given unto man once to live and then to die. After that comes a judgment. So you see again, tabernacle is the temporary abode of the soul, because eventually you're going to die. So you see how tabernacle doesn't seem to have the permanence of temple. So now, like I'm saying, Israel starts out with that which does not point to permanence, but they work in the permanence later on. But to me, I feel as a reflection of a permanent God who is a creator, the permanent creator, you should have started out with the permanence of a temple. There was a hurry to start up the nation of Israel. They couldn't wait. They hurried up to do something in the wilderness. Now, this word tabernacle related to tabernacular. Then they said, see the word tavern. So I looked at tavern. It says from the late 13th century, a wine shop, later referred to as a public house in the mid 15th century, from Old French tavern, shed made of boards, booth, stall, also inn, inn, I-N-N, from Latin taberna, meaning shop, inn, tavern, originally meaning hut or a shed, a rude dwelling. So again, you're not dealing with anything that looks very, very nice and has a lot of permanence to it and so on. Quick hurry come up kind of stuff, just like a quick lodging and so on. By dissimilation from traberna, from trabs, beam, timber, dwelling, a building from Old Welsh house, dwelling again, they go on similar kinds of words here. And a wooden shed. But generally it seems to have the idea of a quick setup kind of stuff. Sometimes probably used for short-term dwelling, although you could certainly stay there for a long time. Now let me look in this. That's from etymonline.com. Let me look in this Collins Etymological and Reference Dictionary from, it says here, August 1954. I'm going to look at tabernacle from page 363. For the word tabernacle, and it says here, tabernaculum, from taberna, meaning a hut, a slightly built habitation. So notice again, slightly built. So not like with the permanence and care taken to build in the permanence of a temple like the stone temples that's known worldwide. But tabernacle, a slightly built habitation, a tent, the Jewish temple, place of worship. In scripture, dwelling place, the dwelling place of the soul, the body, to dwell or reside for a time. So again, nothing quite permanent, just for a time. But it seems that Adam's setup was meant to have the permanence of a temple, because if the creator is going to be inside the man, then the creator is not intending to do anything temporary. Every man is going to have that kind of temple, and it's going to pass on. So it's like a permanent part of the makeup of Adam, so that all their children now, when Eve comes into the picture, they're going to have this temple where they can connect with the creator that's inside of them. And it's inside this temple of Adam, or in his mind, where he heard the voice of God, that he can sort of like download a signal, or might I say, connect with a signal, something in the heart. Remember that leb I talked about, that heart, that inner part of you that you don't see. And so the message comes into your heart. It's like it generates from the heart, I should say. And then you feel it, or you can sort of, in an inner kind of way, handle it with the words in your thoughts. And then you can express that by writing it down or speaking it. So inside this temple of Adam, or the temple of the mind, you are having words generated inside of you. What is coming from on the inside of you, that to me would be the creator, because he blew breath, he entered inside of the man, man became a living soul. So now man can think and feel things and so on. So the Creator is actually doing these things inside of the man, and then the man from there can go on to expressing himself in the world, and searching in the world, and investigating the world around him and so on, as these thoughts are being generated inside of him to explore the world around him. So it took the Creator entering inside of him to be able to explore the world. So God leads him to explore the world that he made. And he now enables the man to explore the world or interface with the world. So it's kind of like, pardon me for putting it this way, but the Creator or God is like the map, or the Ruah or the Spirit is like the map that knows where to go and just needs to traverse or go through to explore the world, or explore based on the map. So he can now move around in the world according to the map or the blueprint that's in him, to go into the world and touch things and taste things and so on. Because the map was already placed inside of him when the Creator entered into him. This is the permanence of the temple of Adam, where the Creator is housed inside of the man. And now every man comes out like that, being able to do this kind of stuff, to interface with the world around him, because of the permanence of the indwelling of the Creator. So what's all the to do in the Torah that says Israel is the only? So what's all the to do in the Torah that says Israel is the only? It's just an investigation. But as something is generated inside of the man, when he entered inside Adam, then I looked up this word wireless from the same Collins Etymological and Reference Dictionary on page 455. It says wireless, without wires, especially of telegraphy, wireless telegraphy or telephony, wireless receiving or transmitting. To send a message by wireless transmitting or receiving station. So, from this spirit that's inside the man, or of the essence that has been placed in the man by the Creator entering in with this, what is called breath, the man gets a wireless connection, where stuff is just wirelessly communicated to him. So when you think to do a certain thing, it just generates inside of you, and that's like a wireless happening inside of you. You don't know where it comes from, you just say it's inside of you. So like when he went to eat his food from the tree, he got this wireless transmitting inside of him, and he wirelessly received it. That looks good, it looks like something I can eat, and it actually smells nice. And so he is led, or he is attracted to it, and he bites into it, and eventually it gets called a mango. But it all started from something that was wirelessly transmitted inside the man, and it works its way through, all the way through his eyes and his nostrils that smell it and so on, and his hands that reach forth to pick it. It started from something that was wirelessly transmitted inside of the man. There's a permanence to the temple of Adam because we continue to function like that today. Now let's run over to John chapter 1 in the New Testament, and verse 9 to 10 and verse 14. It says, "That was the true light which lighteth every man that cometh into the world." This has for a while now been a strange verse to me in the New Testament, because if Jesus is the light and he lights every man that cometh in, it seems to be robbing us of something that the Torah was trying to say, although it's making use of it. Because if the light is the light of truth, then how can the light of Jesus light every man that comes into the world, but some men resist that light and do not accept the truth? Because if Jesus is that light of truth, how do you ignore God's light? Or not choose Jesus because you're ignoring him? And many say Jesus is God. How does God shine his light on you, this Jesus God, and you still remain in darkness? How can God shine his light and anybody decide they do not want it? Don't shine your light on me, or take your light back. How does God become resisted? Should he not be irresistible? It goes on here in verse 10 to say, he was in the world, and the world was made by him, and the world knew him not. My question again is, he was this light that lights everyone that comes into the world that he made. And after he makes the world and fills it with people, it goes on to say, the world knew him not. How does this Jesus God from the New Testament book of John make a world full of people and the world just does not know him? Because I would think if I made the world is going to know me. If I made the world, you're just not going to ignore me. I don't care how great you feel you are. I made the world, I made you, you're not going to ignore me. Think of it. You're asking for reparations for black people. And you're coming up with all kinds of fancy ways to figure out how to get around it. We're native, we're aboriginal, we're indigenous, we're everything. We're not black, we're white. We're not white, we're this, we're that, we're everything. But the truth is, if you were God, or if you had the power, you would make white people who enslaved you pay you reparations. Because if you had the power, you would just make it happen. They would not be able to get around it because you got the power. You would make them change their laws that they refuse to change. You would make them show up all the so-called slave ships. You would make them do all kinds of things. You would make them give up all the lands. You would make them return everything they stole from you, all the gold, all the wealth, all the everything. You would just make it be done because you've got the power. And you are just mere mortal man. But God, Jesus, makes a world and people don't know him and he can't do a thing about it. But find 12 disciples who one of them ended up betraying him real fast, and the others ended up being killed off, a lot of them, for trying to get out his message, because he's trying to make every man know. Because he himself said, go in the highways and the byways. He's trying to get every man to know. I just don't get this Jesus. So he makes a world, and the world doesn't know him. Verse 14. And the Word was made flesh and dwelt among us, and we beheld his glory, the glory as of the only begotten of the Father, full of grace and truth. Now that word there, dwelt, when it said Word was made flesh and dwelt, this is basically the word that they're using to say that he tabernacled, he dwelt, he tabernacled among us. And so this Jesus here, if he's tabernacling, it's like there's no permanence here to him, because he doesn't have the fullness of the temple. the permanence of the temple, because he wasn't there before, it seems, although they try to prove that, and he's going to be killed at the hands of the enemies of the people he came to free. And then after he supposedly raises up, he's going to go away again. So you see the whole tabernacle idea there. There's no permanence to his presence. Then he says, I'll pray the Father, he's going to send the Spirit. So it's just like the tabernacle had to be taken down in the wilderness, and then the pillar of fire would be set in place and the pillar of cloud. So the tabernacle idea seems to not have much permanence to it. So this God is functioning, even when he comes in flesh, with that which is less than permanence. And this is your New Testament God? He tabernacles because he's not expected to stay. He tabernacles because he's likened unto a tent, a hut, a quick hurry set up kind of place that doesn't have the permanence to it. It seems to me that Adam's tabernacle of the mind, in his own body, seems to make more sense than trying to go into temples made with men's hands. Your temple was constructed by the Creator. More seems to me you are the temple that the Creator is living in. And no one needs to bring a sacrifice of lambs in the Old Testament or of Jesus on the cross of Calvary. Because your temple is already filled with the Creator. The Creator lives inside of you. And when we learn to live proper lives by what we know instinctively and naturally, instead of continuing to be evil toward other people, that's when God will be seen in man. But lies and deception have told you that you can only see God if you go take part in one of the world's religious system, and if you're Hebrew Israelite, that's going to include your temple. You have to go to one of these places to connect with God and bring a sacrifice to the high priest, when you are the temple that the Creator lives in. Instead of going to a temple, the Creator actually came to Adam and entered inside of Adam. So now Psalm 139 verse 14 says, I will praise thee, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. See, that's the permanence, because even today, after thousands of millions of years, however long we've been here, the human body is still seen to be a mystery in how it's made. Now they're building robots patterned after how the body has been made. Why? Because it is mysterious, it is awesome. It is the mark of the Creator, the masterpiece of what the Creator did. I will praise thee, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. This kind of masterpiece, this kind of creation, man, is what the Creator looked at and said, I'm going to inhabit. I'm going to go inside this creation. For I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Marvelous are thy works, and that my soul knoweth right well. And you know that the Creator entered into Adam if you are a believer in the Torah, and that Adam did not have to go to a temple, whether of Israel or of any other nation, in order to connect with his God, because his God or his Creator went inside of him instead of him trying to go inside a temple to find his God.